This is war. This is war. We are fighting down to the core. This is war.
And welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, did the social media stuff. Very much appreciated. Appears that Aaron is still as popular as ever. Certainly when I had a look at the statistics mid last week, it was certainly the most watched episode of the show within that sort of 4 or 5 day span. So yeah, big thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed as yet, or you're a new viewer, please do so. It gives me a nice warm fuzzy feeling to see my subscriber count go up, so that would be really cool. If you don't want to subscribe, doesn't really matter as long as you watch the show. So yeah, that was last week. Let's move on to today's episode of the show. As you can see, we're looking at another range of independent whiskey. These independents, they seem to be cropping up, don't they? They're coming out of the woodwork quicker than, well, yeah, whatever comes out of woodwork. Woodworm, I think, yeah. Anyway, so the thing with today's independent bottling company called Heroes and Heretics, my history with them, this is sounding sort of a bit arsey, but kind of started in 2020 when the then sales director, I think his name is Stephen, I think, sort of contacted me with their current release, which was a series called the Higginbottom Revival series. More on that in a second. Obviously 2020 was probably the worst time to contact me with regards to stocking whiskey. I mean, we were, yo-yoing in and out of lockdown. My whiskey sales had been absolutely hammered, and there was no way on that I could take on any new whiskey. I mean, even sort of online sales had really sort of taken a pasting, because as you well know, the Good Dram Show is obviously nothing at all to do with my employer, but obviously I work for that company, so it's all intermingled. And the type of establishment we have a shop obviously in Nottingham, and we rely very heavily on footfall for customers coming into the shop, asking for recommendations, whether it's wine, whiskey, cigars, whatever. And of course, when we were locked down, that was us well and truly screwed, basically. So yeah, unfortunately it was kind of the wrong time, but anyway, here we are 3 years later down the line, and the new sales director, a chap called Freddie Brown, got in touch and said, we're an independent bottling company. And I thought, yes, I know, I've heard of you, and kindly send me the samples, which I'm obviously reviewing today. So a little bit about the company. Apparently founded in 2015 under the name of the Whiskey Market. Yeah, okay, it's a bit of a well, I'm not going to comment on that. It's an obvious, I suppose, name for a cask investment company. Yeah, boo hiss. And a brokerage company. And this was basically what the company was initially set up to do. According to Freddie, they have kind of tailed off a little bit on their investment sales. They want to sort of obviously continue to sort of like the broking side of the business, which is kind of, I suppose, their bread and butter. But like a lot of these companies, I mean, there are several that kind of spring to mind, sort of Bartle's Whiskey being one of them. They want to bottle their own stuff. They've got these casks coming through. No doubt, they sell fairly quickly given the state of the market, and literally anything that is available gets kind of gobbled up, as we well know. So back in sort of 2020, sorry, they decided to release this range called the Higginbottom Revival. Now, one of the chaps behind the company, his grandfather, I think it was a chap called David Higginbottom, who was an author, went under the pen name of Nicholas Fisk, wrote children's books, I believe. I honestly don't know the author, unfortunately, but apparently he died, and they wanted to release a series of whiskies in his honour, which is why they called it the Higginbottom Revival series. Now, apparently, while they were at the funeral talking to other members of the family, it turns out that there was a whisky link to another member of the family, an earlier member of the family called Henry Albert Higginbottom, who owned a number of pubs in Newcastle in the late 1800s. He apparently also bottled his own whiskey. This is actually sort of has a very James Eady kind of feel to it. There's obviously the big similarity, pub owners, making their own whiskey, distributing it, and apparently Henry Higginbottom apparently supplied troops during the Boer War and the First World War. So there was this kind of tie-in to the whole Higginbottom Revival series. I don't know how well it sold, but that series has since been canned. It is a bit of a mouthful, and although there is a lovely backstory to it, has to be said, it probably wasn't sort of working, shall we say, hence why we have the Heroes and Heretics range now. Now, sort of the link, there is still a link, H-A-H, for obviously Henry Albert Higginbottom and Heroes and Heretics. I did ask Freddie why they'd used the name Heroes and Heretics, and it was they wanted to imply that their whiskey was for everyone, for all the heroes and the heretics. Yeah, okay, so it's a bit tenuous, I guess, that the naming, but hell, why not? It's I've heard worse reasons for companies' names, it has to be said. But Freddie, kindly sent me all these samples, which I've obviously tasted in the past, and I thought it would be nice to do an episode of the show because, well, you never know. One or two of them may well be on the shelf in a certain whiskey emporium. You never know. Well, you have to go and look at the website. But anyway, I thought it would be nice to do an episode of the show on them. Just time to introduce today's lineup, I think.
That's a storm. That's a storm. See the light.
Right, okay, so the first bottling we're going to start with is the bottling called the Falls of Caledonia. This is a 7-year-old Glentauchers, bottled at 54%, a single sherry hogshead 9900355, distilled in November of 2014, bottled in February of last year, and like I said, 7 years old. Now, you're probably thinking, why am I starting with a sherried whiskey? Well, you look at the colour of that, and there ain't going to be a huge amount of sherry, I don't think, in that, so I'm quite confident at sort of starting off. Also, it's the youngest one in today's lineup. Second bottling is called the Disciples. I wouldn't want to be a disciple of Macduff, it has to be said. Yes, it's a 13-year-old Macduff. Oh yes, one of my favourite distilleries. It's a bourbon hoggy, number 900-225, bottled at 54%, distilled in October of 2008 and bottled in October of 2021. Right, moving on to the third bottling. This is called the MacNab. Now, apparently, so I've been told, that this is kind of like their going forward point. They're going to take the MacNab and use it as a brand name for a bigger range of whiskies. They'll be still doing the single cask stuff. Whether they'll be using these names or not, I don't honestly know. They're still planning to do rum and an American whiskey, so they're keeping Stateside and whatever the rum is called, Darkwood. But apparently they're going to be focusing on the MacNab. Anyway, so this bottling of the MacNab is a 13-year-old Westport. Now, for those of you that don't know, Westport is teaspooned Glenmorangie. Don't often see it, it has to be said. I think I've only ever come across it at least 2 or 3 times in the last 20 odd years, so it's not a sort of a regular occurrence, so always interesting to see a single cask Glenmorangie. So this is again a Bourbon Hoggy 900 244, distilled in October of 2006, bottled in October of 2022, and it is at 50%. Right, moving on to, wrong one, this one, the Heroes and Heretics Smoke and Glory. It's a Leche. Ooh, Macduff and Leche, all in the same tasting. This could be interesting. But anyway, it's post 2008, and you know my theory on Leche, and if you don't know my theory, just do a search for the episode of the show that I did on Leche not so long ago. Anyway, so this is a 12-year-old Leche, distilled in October of 2010, bottled in January of this year. It's sherry butt number 35. Again, doesn't look very heavily sherry influenced to me, and bottled at 50.3%. Then we're going to move on to the bottling they've called the Stateside, for obvious reasons. This is a George Dickle, a 10-year-old George Dickle. Now, when was the last time you saw a bottling of George Dickle? I mean, I can't even get hold of the distillery bottlings, let alone an independent bottling. And I mean, I've only ever seen, again, a handful of privately bottled George Dickle. So obviously the guys behind Heroes and Heretics have got some good contacts, it has to be said. So anyway, this is an American Standard Barrel, number 39, distilled in October of 2011. There seems to be an October theme running through these releases. I don't know whether that's coincidence or whether that was actually designed, and bottled in July of 2022 at 51%. And the final bottling of the afternoon is, as I said, their rum. So it's the Darkwood Belize Traveller's Rum, 13 years old. Cask number 5, distilled, actually not distilled in October, so that one throws a spanner in the works, doesn't it? July of 2008, bottled in August of 2021, again at 51%. So finishing off with a bit of good rum, hopefully. Anyway, so not really much more to say, apart from let's kick off with a bit of Glentauchers.
How do you feel? How is it to bleed? Oh, you'll never know.
Okay, so 7-year-old Glentauchers. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? It's unusual for Glentauchers, it has to be said. It's not as intense and minerally and sort of highland and granity. It's a lot fuller. A lot more sweet barley, it has to be said. A little bit of smoke, apricot, quite a bit of oak as well. I'm getting that sort of vanilla-y ice cream, not sherry. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of possible dried fruit, but it's kind of, it's becoming more spey now, sort of. I'm getting that kind of green fruit, gooseberry. It's becoming a little bit more tart now. Yeah, definitely spey-like now. Well, obviously it is spey, but it's always, to me, it's always become, I've always thought of it as a highland, if you see what I mean, or the character of it, should we say. And I'm not getting that usual kind of intense, minerally kind of character. It's just very different for Glentauchers. Again, sort of, you know, kind of feeds into the sort of the whole we sell our casks because they don't quite fit our flavour profile. Certainly this one doesn't come across as like a Glentauchers, but anyway. Anyway, it's a nice nose, it has to be said, irrespective of whether it's very Glentauchers or not. It is actually quite a pleasant nose. Let's the pass right. Again, creamy oak, wood spice. Not a huge amount of sherry, a little bit of dried fruit. I'm getting a little bit of dried fruit right on the aftertaste. Again, very spey-like in character. Almost sort of astringent green fruit, green apple, gooseberry. It's a little metallic note there right on the mid-palate, which is just jarring a little bit. But it's kind of sort of interwoven with all that kind of green, sort of austere, astringent fruit. a little bit of barley coming through on the finish. It's kind of has the impression of kind of fullness, but the alcohol is kind of like sort of, you know, emphasising that spey green fruit, which is, like I said, a little bit sort of overly astringent. Let's see what water does now. Simpler now. I mean, it is 7 years old, so you shouldn't expect a huge amount of complexity, but it really is quite simple now. It's a little softer. It's got more of that kind of Sauvignon Blanc kind of white fruit and herbal character. I mean, it's not bad. It's not unpleasant. Like I said, it is kind of, it's typically Spey, but it's not very Glentauchers in my opinion, or certainly doesn't say Glentauchers to me. Anyway, let's see what it passes like now. A bit short, a bit sort of New World Sauvignon Blanc, so sort of more, slightly more creamy white fruits and a little bit of nettles. Not so austere, not so citric, but again, you could argue a little less interesting. So pleasant, okay, nice starter. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Macduff. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Well, no burnt car tyres, it has to be said here. It's not ripping my head off and screaming at me. It's actually all quite, well, yeah, okay. Almost pleasant. There's still that sort of slight petrol-y kind of sort of funky weirdness happening here. Off sweet honey, licorice, white fruit, oily barley. Yeah, it's not overly industrial, but we're not sort of a million miles away from that style, you know. It's kind of controlled funkiness, I suppose you would say. Little bit of almost kind of bread flour, green apple. I mean, you can take this two ways. Look at it as a sort of a Macduff. Actually not too bad. Still not a kind of nose that I'm really into, but you know, if you want to sort of see the good side of Macduff to a certain extent, well, this is certainly giving you the good side anyway. Let's see what the pass on. Plus points, very clean. Again, you don't get that sort of burning car tyres and sort of rubber and all that kind of weird malarkey. It is industrial though. It is quite hard. There is an oiliness there. There's an oily barley note. There's some softening at the edges, which the vanilla oak is generating. A little bit of caramel, a little bit of spice. It's quite hard, quite masked, a lot of alcohol, needs a little drop of water, which I will put a little drop of water with and see what happens. What a little drop of water does. It's brought out a little bit more lime, minerals. It's slightly intensified the sort of petrol-y note. But, you know, like I said, it is Macduff. And it's a clean Macduff. See what the pass like. There's a little bit more sweetness there on the palate, a little bit more sweeter barley, which is to a certain extent offsetting that slightly industrial barley character. It's okay. Like I said, it's very clean. It's still very Macduff, or still quite industrial, but it is what it is at the end of the day.
This is a fight, and you don't seem that bright.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Westport. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's a little austere. Straw-like barley, green apple, white fruit, lime, a little bit of earth, touch of wood smoke, pepper. There's a almost kind of pollen heavy floral note as well. And there's a little sort of chalkiness as well. It's an interesting nose. I wouldn't say I was kind of ambivalent about it. It's interesting. It's not blowing me away, it has to be said. It's got a level of complexity, I suppose. There's certainly, as I said, you know, a number of different elements to it and aromas. It's opening up a little bit as I've given it some aeration, it has to be said. Let's see what the palate gives us. Again, a little austere green fruit, a little hardness. I don't like that finish. Almost metallic green fruit and hard barley. It's not what I would have expected from Glenmorangie, it has to be said. And here we go, and feeding into the whole narrative of why certain distilleries kind of sell off their casks. Because I would have never have pegged this for Glenmorangie, it has to be said, in a million years. It's okay, it's pleasant enough if you like that sort of hard green astringent sort of character, it has to be said. I'll put a little drop of water with it. I mean, I don't think it really needed the water, it has to be said, but we'll see what yeah, there's a little soapiness, I guess, a little bit more sort of sweeter citrus, kind of like almost kind of sugar sprinkled lime. I mean, again, you know, doesn't say Glenmorangie to me, doesn't actually say 15 either, it has to be said. Let's see what the palate's like. Yeah, it's kind of not an awful lot of anything really. Again, it's that sort of green fruit, that sort of industrial barley. Not warming to, I'm afraid, it has to be said. If you like that style of whiskey, if you like sort of things like Macduff and Deanston and so on and so forth, you'll love the style of that. But for me, just lacked some sweetness just to offset all that industrial character. Let's move on to the Smoke and Glory Leche. So 12-year-old Leche. Let's see what the nose gives on this then, shall we? That's a nice nose. Quite herbal, quite astringent, peaty, smoke, barbecued meat. Yeah, no cardboard here. God, if Leche or if Tobermory keeps this up, my God, I'm going to have to give them a. They're going to have to do a Thule, aren't they? They're going to have to be promoted from the axis of evil. I mean, I know they're kind of on the edge, sort of E+ kind of level. And admittedly, a lot of it's going to probably come down to sort of distillery bottlings and the Tobermory. But obviously, as you know, Tobermory 12-year-old is blasted in new oak, so difficult to sort of. Difficult to ascertain the character of the spirit underneath all of that, but anyway, I'm digress. Anyway, so this is actually a lovely nose, it has to be said. And how many times have you ever heard me say a lovely and Leche all in the same kind of sentence? It's got some lovely peat. It's not a peat monster. It's peppery, it's smoky, barbecuey, meaty. Little bit of green pepper, capsicum. Not a lot of sherry, just a smidge of dried fruit. I like that. That's nice. That's a good nose. And this always goes to show, you know, that you should always keep an open mind with regards to anything you taste, even if it's from a distillery that you're not a big fan of, because every now and again, as they say, every dog has its day. And this dog is definitely having its day. Let's see what that's like. That is very, very good. I mean, loads of green pepper, capsicum, dry peat, earthy peat, barbecued meat, dark chocolate, sultana, little bit of dried fruit, little bit of salty astringency, astringent peat. I could go on and on. Lovely herbal fade, tongue-tingling spices, just a lovely peated malt. Not too peaty, but a good level of peat. And like I said, I've always associated leche, if you ignore the sort of wet cardboard, with a lovely kind of meatiness, a sort of meaty barbecued smoked meat character. Maybe not the most barbecuey of leches I've ever come across, but really complex, really clean leche, how it should be. And well, there you have it. So bloody good. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 10-year-old George Dickle. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Ooh. Oh yeah, that's a lovely nose. Lots of lovely dark rye bread, rye spices, chunky corn sitting beneath it, toasted oak, wood smoke, a little bit of violets. Actually, sort of, I'm quite surprised at the sort of violety note just for a 10-year-old. Oh, that's got some complexity. That is. I must admit, I mean, George Dickle, I don't think I've ever come across a bad bottling of. Their sort of standard, whatever, I can't remember what it is now, their standard sort of white label-y bottling is a bit okay. But independent bottlings of George Dickle have just always been top quality, and damn, that's good. That's a lovely nose. It's, like I said, plenty of rye, nice supporting oak, nice supporting sort of fat corn, lovely spiciness, getting an almost kind of meatiness coming through, which is quite sort of a surprise, unexpected, but it's adding a sort of a nice kind of element to the nose. Let's see what the pal's like. Wow, stunning, absolutely stunning. Kicks off with all that lovely sort of dark, spicy rye bread, treacle, dark marzipan, lovely oak spices, wood smoke, a little bit of toast. It does bitter a little bit on the mid palate, but I actually quite like that. I think it's kind of adding a counterpoint to almost kind of like squashes the sort of the oak and the sort of the corn. You sort of start off with that lovely spicy rye and then it comes through with the corn on the mid palate spot, and then the sort of bitterness of the oak kind of kicks in on the mid palate. A little bit of green pepper, again more marzipan, corn coming back on the aftertaste. Really complex, bloody good whiskey, it has to be said. I'd quite happily drink it like that. I don't really think it needs any water, but I'm going to put a little drop with it just to see what happens. Lightens the nose a little bit. I'm getting more corn, less rye, a little bit more oak as well, a little bit more sort of marzipan oak. I think I personally prefer it sort of neat because I prefer that sort of more rye character. But you know, this is another one of those sort of whiskies where you know you decide how you like your poison, if you like. So the pal's like. Palate is very much the same, less less dark, less spicy, less rye orientated, a little bit more corn, a little fatter, a little sweeter, a little bit more sort of creamy American oak. Possibly a little less complex, although the bitterness has now kind of shifted from the mid palate into the finish. Personally, I prefer that neat. I love the intensity of it neat, but again, certainly water doesn't actually do it any harm at all. So, damn good. Okay, so on to the final spirit of the day. This is the Darkwood Belize Traveller's Rum. 13 years old. Let's see what those gives us on this end, shall we? And thrice yeah, that's a lovely nose. That's very Foursquare like, very spicy, very woody. I like that. That's nice. Toasty oak, coconut, dried apricot, bit of banana, dried banana, a little bit of raisin, touch of sweet spice. That's a good rum. That is a absolutely divine nose. That is beautiful. Love that. Love that intensity. Plenty of complexity. Like I said, very much in that sort of Foursquare kind of style. Quite dark, quite woody, but nice lightness there as well. Really, really well balanced. Let's see what the pad's like. Dark, sweet, rummy, dried fruits, sultana, apricot, raisin, date, lovely wood spice. Again, nod to that Foursquare woodiness there. A little bit of tannin, slightly mask, lovely mid palate, touch of coffee, lovely lingering sort of juicy, figgy, dark fruit finish. Coconutty aftertaste. Really complex. That is bloody good, it has to be said. Again, like the George Dickle, I really don't think it needs any water whatsoever. I mean, it's 51%. But let's experiment. Okay, so we're lighter now. We're less dark, woody spiciness. Getting that sort of column still dried fruit. I think Travellers is a column still distillery, I believe. I could be wrong, but it's certainly slightly higher toned, slightly more column still dried fruit character, dried citrus, toastier oak possibly. Still a lovely nose, has to be said. Let's see what the pad's right now. Again, slightly lighter, more of that column still kind of character. Spicy dried fruits again. Slightly less woody, a little longer possibly. Lovely chocolatiness. I mean, I love that. That is absolutely stunning. Dries a little bit right at the very end. The tannins do kind of come back and the woodiness kind of comes back, but that's a big mouth-filling rum, it has to be said. Like that. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, big thank you again to Freddie for the samples for today's episode of the show. Overall, a 50-50 split, I think. 50% that I was not overly keen on. Certainly none of the ones that I wasn't overly keen on were completely rubbish. They were what they were, it has to be said. The Glentauchers was very un-Glentauchers to me. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is difficult to say, I suppose. It is what it is. Different. It was a little bit too green fruit, a little bit too austere, a little bit too space-idey for my personal palate, it has to be said, but not a bad whiskey. The Macduff, it is what it is, again, at the end of the day. It's one of those Axis of Evil distilleries, but it's a clean version thereof. So if you really want to know what I'm banging on about with all that industrial notes and stuff like that, that's actually not a bad one to go for. I have tasted a hell of a lot worse, it has to be said. The MacNab, I'm going to have to say probably the most disappointing of the three that I wasn't that keen on. Knowing what... where it comes from, knowing what the distillery produces, the quality of what it produces, that I thought just kind of like really wasn't up to scratch. At the end of the day, that you know, you can shoot me for that, but I just didn't think that was kind of worth shelling out for. It has to be said, but. Then we get on to the good stuff. The Leche. The Leche was stunningly good. I mean, you know. How many times have you heard me say those kind of three words in the same sentence? Probably very, very few, it has to be said. I would quite happily sell you that bottle of whiskey. I would happily explain why I think that was a bloody good Leche. So, what more do you want? George Dickle, well, like I said, you know, I've not tasted a bad bottling of George Dickle at all. It's lovely to sort of finally find another independent bottling of Dickle, which I can stick on the shelves because, you know, it's just a great Tennessee whiskey, you know, and it's not the only distillery in Tennessee. And the Belize, the Darkwood, I mean, just a lovely rum, just really very, very good. And well, what more do you want? I mean, that was just a stunning way to finish this week's episode of the show, it has to be said. So, next week there won't be an episode of the show because we're beginning that period of, that period of time when I kind of like spend in my entirety of my life at work, or it feels like that anyway. So, yes, there won't be an episode of the show next week as I will be working next weekend. Then there's 2 weekends, I think, the first couple of weekends in December, which I do have free, which hopefully I will do an episode of the show. I imagine I will have to do the Christmas episode of the show in the second week of December, because from there on in it's kind of like work, 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 as they say. But hopefully I will see some of you lovely people in the shop, or if I don't see you in the shop, hopefully you'll ping me some emails and buy some stuff, which is always kind of good because that means I keep my job for a little bit longer. No, it doesn't mean that. But no, you know, as we well know, there is always a commercial element to these, and like I said, 3 of these whiskies certainly are on sale at a certain emporium. So if you are local, or if you're not, you know, and you want to purchase said whiskey because they're bloody good, then please do so. Aside from that, like I said, until next time, good afternoon and good ramming.